The night was electric with anticipation. The crowd was abuzz, whispers filled the studio, and millions more watched from their living rooms. It was a moment many had waited for. Michael Jordan, the icon, the legend, the basketball superstar, was set to appear on a live talk show, ready to share his wisdom, reflections, and insights. The audience was on edge, wondering what profound thoughts Jordan would share next. At 58, he was still sharp, composed, and as commanding as ever. But as he stepped onto the stage, there was something in the air, something that hinted this would be a far different interview than anyone had expected. The host, Vanessa Clark, known for her sharp tongue and relentless approach, was prepared for one thing: to make Michael Jordan squirm. "So, Michael," she began, her voice laced with calculated sweetness, "at your age, do you ever wake up and think, what if today is the day I can't do it anymore? What's it like to know your time is running out?" The room fell deathly silent. Her words hung in the air like an attack, a challenge to the legend sitting before her. The audience exchanged uneasy glances. Michael Jordan didn't flinch. His gaze never wavered. He simply sat, his hands clasped together, his gaze steady. The storm that had just been unleashed was barely noticeable in the way he held himself. With calm strength, he remained motionless, his deep eyes reflecting something more profound than mere irritation. Vanessa, clearly determined to maintain her control over the interview, didn't miss a beat. Her voice grew even sharper as she leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with an almost predatory focus. "You've played some of the greatest roles in basketball history, Michael," she said, her words oozing with calculated challenge. "You've been the best in the game, the one who could do no wrong. But let's be honest, how does it feel to know that time has caught up with you? How does it feel to face the truth that your peak has passed, that the world has moved on, and you're now just another aging legend?" The words were sharp, biting, and venomous. It was as if she intended to provoke him, to force him to confront his own mortality in a way that would make him uncomfortable, perhaps even vulnerable. The room fell deathly silent, the audience holding its collective breath, waiting to see if Michael Jordan would flinch. They could feel the tension between the host's mocking tone and Jordan's seemingly unshakable composure. But Michael Jordan didn't flinch. He didn't even seem to register the sting of her words. He simply sat there, his posture impeccable, his hands resting calmly on his lap. His face was unreadable, a mask of quiet strength. There was a stillness about him that radiated power, a power that didn't need to be spoken, a power that was felt in the air around him. For a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. His calm, centered presence shifted the atmosphere in the studio like a powerful force. It wasn't anger or frustration that emanated from him, but something deeper, something wise and knowing, a quiet strength that could not be shaken. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he spoke. His voice was soft at first, almost whispering, but there was a weight in each word. "Vanessa, have you ever sat beside someone as they took their final breath?" His voice, though gentle, carried a profound depth that sent a chill through the entire room. The audience, captivated by his shift in tone, leaned forward as one. The stark contrast between his composed demeanor and her sharp words was now undeniable. Vanessa, caught off guard, blinked rapidly. She had expected a reaction, maybe a defensive response, or even a scathing retort. But instead, Michael Jordan, the man who had spent decades in the spotlight, had chosen this moment to challenge her. Through silence, through stillness, and with a question that cut to the very core of what it means to be human. "I have," Michael continued, his voice steady, never wavering. "Many times." The room fell completely silent, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of his words. The audience, previously on edge, was now gripped by the unexpected turn of the conversation. It was as though every person in the room had collectively paused, holding their breath, waiting for more. "I've held the hands of dear friends," Michael said quietly, his gaze unwavering, locking with Vanessa's, as they spoke their final words. "I've watched remarkable individuals, strong, inspiring people, take their last breath. And do you know what they regret the most?" He paused, letting the question linger in the air, the weight of it settling over everyone present. Vanessa, for the first time, was speechless. The smirk that had once been plastered on her face was gone, replaced by an uncertainty she couldn't hide. She opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. Michael Jordan's calm, steady gaze held her there, as if daring her to respond. But she couldn't. "They never regret fame or money," he continued, his voice soft but carrying the weight of years of lived experience. "What they regret is that they didn't love enough. They didn't forgive enough. They didn't cherish life enough. They wish they had taken more time to appreciate the people around them, the moments that matter." The studio was silent. A woman in the front row wiped away a tear, and a few others exchanged quiet glances. It was as if the words Michael had just spoken had reached deep into their hearts, stirring something profound. A few more tears began to fall as people sat motionless, reflecting on his wisdom. And for the first time in the interview, Vanessa Clark, a woman who had built her reputation on shaking her guests, making them uncomfortable and forcing them to confront their deepest insecurities, was left without a comeback. No sharp word or pointed question could cut through the depth of Michael's words. His response had shifted the entire tone of the conversation. She sat there, stunned, caught in a moment of profound realization. The power dynamic had completely flipped, and the host, once in control, now found herself disarmed by the quiet strength and wisdom of the man before her. It was a moment none of them would soon forget. Vanessa, still trying to regain her footing, pushed on with another calculated jab. The air in the studio was thick with discomfort, but she wouldn't back down. She had come prepared for this. She would not let Michael Jordan turn the tide of this interview so easily. "You know," she began, her voice steady, though the sharpness of her tone now felt somewhat forced, "Hollywood tends to forget people like you. As you get older, you begin to fade into the background. Don't you think? People your age are no longer the center of attention. You've had your time, Michael. The spotlight moves on. What's it like to know that the industry and society often ignores the older generation once they've outlived their usefulness?" The audience grew uncomfortable again. There was a quiet murmur among the crowd as some shifted in their seats, but no one dared to speak. They watched Michael closely, curious to see how he would handle yet another jab. It was clear that Vanessa had a plan. She wanted to force him into an uncomfortable corner, make him admit his age had somehow lessened his value. But this time, Michael Jordan didn't let her have the upper hand. He leaned back in his chair, the cool confidence of a man who had weathered countless battles of both the physical and emotional kind. He didn't react with defensiveness or anger. He didn't even flinch at the insinuation. Instead, he exhaled slowly, rubbing his fingers together, a gesture many in the room recognized as one of deep thought. His gaze never left Vanessa's, but there was something new in his eyes now. Pity, not anger, not frustration, but the quiet pity of a man who had long ago learned how to see beyond the surface of others' words. "Vanessa," Michael began, his voice calm yet firm, "I've been through a lot in my life, and I've seen a lot too. I've watched people come and go, but let me tell you something that most people, especially those in your position, don't understand." He paused for a moment, letting the tension build before speaking again. "Age doesn't make someone irrelevant. In fact, age grants something far more precious than anything youth can offer: perspective. I've seen the world change in ways that many will never understand. I've witnessed history unfold right before my eyes, and I've been blessed enough to live long enough to see the lessons those experiences have taught me. The truth is, being forgotten by the world isn't something to fear. What matters is whether or not you've learned to see yourself, whether you've made peace with your life's journey." The audience, hanging on every word, could feel the weight of his statement. They could feel the authenticity of his experience. Michael wasn't just talking about his own life. He was speaking for everyone who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or forgotten by society. He was speaking for the elderly, for the ones whose contributions were no longer appreciated, for those who had been quietly shoved to the margins. His words weren't just personal reflections, they were universal truths. "You see, Vanessa," Michael continued, his voice now imbued with a quiet strength, "there is power in age. There is wisdom in experience. The world may forget you, but the real question is, have you learned to stand firm when the world has moved on?" Vanessa, clearly rattled, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. For the first time, she felt as if she was the one being interrogated. The sharp, critical questions she had prepared to ask had fallen flat, unable to penetrate the calm and composed demeanor of the man sitting before her. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted. No longer was it a place where she could ask brutal questions without consequence. Now it was a place of reflection, a place where words had weight and meaning. Michael Jordan leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "You speak of relevance, of fame, of the importance of youth. But Vanessa, you forget something. Relevance isn't about being in the spotlight. It's about knowing that what you've done, who you've been, and the impact you've had on others will never fade. Your legacy isn't defined by the world's attention, it's defined by what you leave behind in the hearts and minds of those you touch." As the words sank in, there was a noticeable shift in the room. Vanessa's usual sharp, confident composure had slipped, and she was left struggling to find a counterpoint. She had expected to break Michael Jordan, to make him uncomfortable, to show the world that even the strongest among us had their weaknesses. But instead, she had found herself facing a man who had long ago transcended the shallow measures of fame and success. The studio was eerily quiet. Vanessa sat frozen, the bravado she had entered with now completely gone. The words she had intended to use to undermine him had been turned back onto her, and she was left unable to respond. Michael had not only confronted her challenge head-on, he had transformed the entire interview into something deeper, something more profound. The shift in power was palpable. The audience, who had initially expected Michael to buckle under the pressure, now found themselves watching in awe. Vanessa's attempts to provoke him had backfired in a way no one could have anticipated. What had started as a hostile interview had, in a matter of moments, become a masterclass in grace, wisdom, and the strength of a life well lived. The power in the end did not belong to the one asking the questions, it belonged to the one who had the wisdom to answer them. The room was thick with tension, and Vanessa, clearly off balance for the first time, was trying desperately to regain control. It was almost as if she was clinging to the remnants of her composure, hoping to steer the conversation back to familiar ground. The sharpness in her voice, once so confident, had begun to crack under the weight of Michael Jordan's calm authority. She cleared her throat and tried to steer the interview back to more personal territory. "You've faced a lot of adversity in your life, Michael. Growing up in poverty, losing your father at a young age, battling critics your entire career. Tell me, do you ever resent the fact that your journey has been so difficult? Is there ever a moment when you think to yourself, 'I've had enough of this struggle'?" Her words were designed to provoke him, to dig deeper into the pain of his past. It was the kind of question she had asked many of her previous guests, sharp, probing, meant to expose the raw, hidden parts of their story. But as the question left her lips, she realized too late that Michael Jordan was no ordinary guest. He was a man who had faced the harshest of realities, yet still stood unwavering, a monument to resilience and strength. Michael didn't flinch. His gaze, unwavering and steady, met hers with a quiet intensity. For a moment there was only silence between them, the weight of his calm gaze hanging in the air. The studio, once buzzing with nervous energy, was now completely still. Michael's silence spoke volumes, and Vanessa found herself hesitating. But she had come this far, and she wouldn't back down now. "Do I resent it?" Michael's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of lessons learned. "No, Vanessa, I don't resent it. I thank them." The words landed with a quiet power. Vanessa blinked, caught off guard. She had expected anger, bitterness, maybe even a trace of regret. But what she received instead was something altogether different. Gratitude. "My father wasn't there to guide me," Michael continued, his voice steady, "but his absence taught me a valuable lesson. He showed me exactly what kind of man I didn't want to become. And my mother—" He paused, a flicker of emotion passing through his eyes. "My mother, she taught me how to survive." The audience, captivated by the quiet strength in his words, sat in complete silence. Michael's words weren't the expected response to a question that was meant to delve into his pain. Instead, he had turned the question on its head, transforming his personal hardships into a source of wisdom, growth, and gratitude. There was a vulnerability in Michael's voice that wasn't about weakness. It was the kind of vulnerability that comes from a deep understanding of life's complexities. He wasn't just acknowledging his struggles, he was embracing them, using them as stepping stones to become the man he was today. "Pain is a teacher," he continued, his eyes softening, "and it taught me well. I don't carry pain as a burden, Vanessa. I carry it as a reminder that I'm still here. I'm still standing. I'm still living." The room, once tense with unease, now resonated with a sense of quiet reverence. Vanessa, who had been prepared to dig into Michael's wounds, found herself struck by the profound strength of his response. The words she had hoped would uncover some hidden regret had instead revealed a man at peace with his past, a man who had learned to transform his pain into wisdom and gratitude. For the first time, Vanessa Clark was speechless. Her sharpness, her biting questions, her aggressive pursuit of discomfort, none of it had the effect she had intended. Instead, Michael Jordan had turned the conversation into something far more profound. What had begun as an interview designed to expose weaknesses had evolved into a lesson in resilience, grace, and the power of perspective. In that moment, Vanessa realized that the interview had shifted. She was no longer the one in control. She was no longer the interviewer with all the answers. Instead, she was the one learning, the one reflecting, the one who had been forced to confront her own assumptions. Michael had not just shared his story. He had changed the way the room was thinking, the way the audience was feeling. He had taken the table that Vanessa had tried to set with her pointed questions, and with his calm, steady responses, he had turned it around. The power of the moment was undeniable. The host, once in charge, was now left questioning the assumptions that had guided her career, forced to look inward at the way she had approached her guests and at the way she had treated their stories. Michael Jordan's words, calm and powerful, had become a mirror for her own biases, her own vulnerabilities. And in that silence, the audience couldn't help but feel a shift, not just in the interview, but in themselves. The interview had already shifted irrevocably. Vanessa, once the dominant force in the conversation, was now a spectator, trapped in the web of Michael Jordan's wisdom and quiet power. She shifted in her seat, trying to maintain the composure she was known for, but it was clear she was losing control. The audacity of Michael's responses had broken down the walls she had so carefully constructed, leaving her struggling to find a foothold in the conversation. She needed to regain some semblance of control, but she wasn't sure how. Desperately, she reached for a final topic, something that might allow her to regain her footing. She glanced down at her notes, rifling through the cards in her hands before locking eyes with Michael Jordan once more. The question was sharp, calculated, but it betrayed a hint of vulnerability. A last-ditch attempt to bring the interview back into her grasp. "So, Michael," she began, her voice steady but lacking its earlier edge. "You've had an incredible career, a legacy that most people could only dream of. But as you age, don't you ever wonder, do you ever feel afraid? You've accomplished so much, but time is inevitable. Don't you fear the unknown, the inevitable decline?" She leaned forward slightly, hoping to throw him off balance, to expose that deep fear that even legends like Michael Jordan must feel. The question, though harsh, was met with silence. Michael didn't immediately respond. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his expression soft but resolute. There was no trace of fear, no trace of uncertainty. He simply gazed at her, deeply, calmly, as if weighing her words, but more so, weighing her intent. "Do you know the difference between fear and faith?" Michael asked, his voice warm and steady. The question was simple, but the way he asked it sent ripples through the room. For a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. The audience, the lights, the camera, even Vanessa's nervous energy. The entire room held its breath, waiting for him to explain. Vanessa blinked, caught off guard. Her smug smile faltered. She had expected Michael to break under the weight of her question, to give a human answer filled with doubts and admissions of frailty. Instead, he had turned the question into a philosophical examination of life itself. "Fear," Michael said slowly, choosing each word with careful precision, "is believing in the worst that could happen. It's the voice that tells you that you're not enough, that the end is near and there's nothing you can do about it. Fear holds you captive, binds you to a false reality." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. The audience, sensing the shift, leaned in a little closer, eager to observe every word. "But faith," Michael continued, his voice rising ever so slightly. Faith is believing in the best that could happen. Faith is choosing to trust that what you've done matters, that your purpose still has meaning, and that the best is yet to come. Faith isn't about the absence of fear. It's about knowing that despite the fear, you can still move forward. The studio was completely still. Vanessa sat frozen, her eyes wide, unable to respond. It wasn't just that she had been rendered speechless. It was that Michael Jordan had just shattered her worldview with a single, profound statement. The question she had asked, meant to provoke doubt, had instead revealed a deep truth about the power of belief, the power of perspective, and the strength found in faith. For the first time in her career, Vanessa Clark didn't have an answer. The words she had so carefully prepared for this moment, intended to break down the guest in front of her, had dissolved in the face of Michael's calm conviction. What he had spoken wasn't merely an answer to her question. It was a revelation that reached far beyond the boundaries of the interview. It was a message that transcended time, age, or accomplishment. It was about the power of choosing faith over fear, about understanding that the most meaningful aspects of life lie in how we respond to the inevitable challenges we face. The audience, moved beyond words, sat in stunned silence. A tear slid down a woman's cheek in the front row. Some of them were silently reflecting on their own fears and the power of faith in their own lives. Others clutched their hands together, as if searching for some form of clarity, some affirmation of what Michael had just imparted. Vanessa, meanwhile, seemed smaller than ever. She had spent her career trying to break others down, to expose their flaws, their vulnerabilities, their cracks. But in this moment, she had been the one exposed. Her questions, meant to probe, meant to tear down the legendary man sitting before her, had instead forced her to confront her own limitations, her own doubts, and her own unspoken fears. Michael's quiet power, his ability to respond with grace and wisdom rather than defensiveness, had shifted the entire dynamic of the conversation. He had not only turned the tables on her, he had flipped the entire script of the interview. "You see, Vanessa," Michael said softly, breaking the silence, "wisdom isn't about age, it's about perspective. And the moment you stop fearing the end and start embracing life, that's when you truly start living." Vanessa blinked, still in a daze from the weight of his words. For a brief moment, the interview wasn't about her, wasn't about Michael. It was about something much greater. It was about the wisdom to face the end with grace, the courage to believe in something greater than fear, and the strength to live with faith in what lies ahead. The room erupted in applause, not just for the legend sitting before them, but for the message he had shared, a message that would echo in the minds and hearts of everyone present, long after the cameras stopped rolling. As the clapping filled the room, Vanessa Clark, for the first time, found herself looking inward, realizing that this was a moment that would change her forever. The applause continued to swell, filling the studio with an energy that was impossible to ignore. But as the sound of clapping slowly began to fade, there was an undeniable shift in the room. It wasn't just about the great Michael Jordan sitting before them, or the fact that he had managed to turn the tide of the interview. No, this was bigger than that. It was about the truth he had spoken, the truth that had rippled through everyone in the room, compelling them to reflect on their own lives, their own beliefs, their own fears. As the applause died down, Vanessa, still visibly shaken, shifted in her seat. For the first time in her career, she felt exposed, vulnerable, and incredibly small. She had always prided herself on being in control of the interview, able to steer the conversation in whatever direction she wanted. But tonight, Michael Jordan had done something unexpected. He had flipped the script, forcing her to see herself in a new light. For a long moment, Vanessa sat silently, her eyes downcast. But finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she looked up at Michael. There was no trace of her former arrogance or biting cynicism. Instead, there was something else, something far more genuine. "Michael," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly, "if you had just one message to share with the world before you left, what would it be?" It was a simple question, but for the first time in the interview, there was no sarcasm or calculation in her tone. There was no sharp edge. There was only a quiet sincerity. Michael Jordan, ever the embodiment of calm and grace, took a moment to consider her words. Then, with a slight smile, he leaned forward, his voice soft but filled with purpose. "Life isn't measured by the years we live," he said, his words carrying the weight of everything he had just shared. "It's measured by the love we give, the people we impact, the way we choose to show up for those around us. That's what really matters in the end." The simplicity of his answer was breathtaking. It wasn't about accomplishments or accolades. It was about the way we choose to live our lives, the impact we make on others, and the love we leave behind. The room was silent again, not because of a lack of words, but because Michael's words had filled every corner of the space with truth. Vanessa nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek as she reflected on what Michael had just imparted. It wasn't the response she had expected, but it was the one she needed. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that her role as a talk show host had not been about making people uncomfortable or tearing them down. It had been about sharing stories, learning from others, and creating a space where true, meaningful conversations could unfold. And as Michael Jordan's words lingered in the air, Vanessa found herself truly listening, something she hadn't done in a long time. If Michael Jordan's words have resonated with you, if they've made you reflect on your own life and your own choices, then don't let this moment pass you by. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this, moments of transformation and words of wisdom that can change your life. What did Michael's message mean to you? How has his story impacted the way you see your own journey? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections in the comments below and join the conversation. Remember, life isn't measured by the years we live, but by the love we give. Take a moment to think about what kind of legacy you want to leave behind, and let us know what you're doing to live with purpose. Thank you for being part of this unforgettable moment. We look forward to hearing from you.